What if the Bible you hold in your hands, as sacred and complete as it seems, only scratches the surface of the heavenly drama that shaped our world? What if between its verses lie cracks that once held forgotten names, hidden stories, and beings so powerful that their full truths were pushed into the shadows of history? This video explores that very question, revealing the 7 beings erased or buried so deeply in the past that only one man dared to record their existence. That man was Enoch, and what he saw could change how we understand the spiritual war unfolding all around us. Before we begin this journey into the unseen, into the erased, and into the extraordinary, I invite you to take a moment to subscribe to this channel. If content like this opens your eyes, stirs your faith, or leads you into deeper reflection, then let your voice be part of this growing community. Like the video if you believe the ancient truths still have power today. And leave a comment below to share your thoughts or questions, because your perspective matters and your engagement keeps these messages alive. The Bible, in its current form, stands as the most widely read and studied book in human history. Yet from the very beginning, debates over which books belonged in the canon and which did not shaped what we now call Scripture. Among those cast out or left on the margins was a text that once held a place of honor among early believers, the Book of Enoch, revered in the Ethiopian Church and quoted directly in the New Testament. This ancient writing reveals vision so profound that many feared what would happen if its contents became too widely known. The Book of Enoch does not contradict the Bible. Instead, it expands it. It fills in the silence between the lines. It brings into focus the beings who watched from above, rebelled from within, and fell from glory with such force that their influence rippled through generations. Enoch's writings unveil not just one fallen angel or a vague idea of evil, but a host of specific beings, each with a name, a story, and a purpose. And these 7 beings he recorded are not mythological curiosities, they are keys. Keys to understanding why the world is the way it is, and why certain truths were never meant to remain buried. Why were their stories hidden? Why were some of the most powerful spiritual figures edited out, reduced to single lines or veiled in symbolism? Were church leaders trying to protect the faithful from confusion? Or was something deeper at play? As we peel back the layers of censorship and forgotten tradition, what emerges is not chaos, but clarity. Enoch's visions give us a window into a world where heaven and earth were not always separate, where angels walked among men, and where the consequences of spiritual rebellion shook the foundation of creation. What you are about to hear is not theory, it is testimony. A record from one who stood between worlds, who saw what others were never meant to see. And if you are willing to listen, truly listen, you may find that these beings, though erased from common memory, were never gone at all. They were not strangers to heaven. Their voices once harmonized with creation, and their gaze stretched across the earth, not as conquerors, but as appointed guardians, sentinels of order, watchers of the human race. In the beginning, their mission was pure. Their presence was not a threat, but a gift. They were the Watchers, a class of angelic beings chosen not to rule, but to observe. From their stations above, they were meant to witness the growth of mankind, to record without interference, to guard without temptation. But something changed. Enoch tells us that 200 of them descended to the earth in the days of Jared, drawn not by divine instruction, but by longing. It was not the beauty of the stars or the order of creation that stirred their hearts. It was the daughters of men. The simplicity, the softness, the vulnerability of human women awakened something within these beings that had remained dormant for eternity. Desire, and with it, rebellion. These were not minor transgressions. What happened on Mount Hermon was a covenant of defiance. The Book of Enoch names their leader as Samyaza, though he was not alone. The others bound themselves by oath, swearing that they would carry through with their decision no matter the consequences. They knew the weight of their actions, yet proceeded with a clarity that revealed just how far they had drifted from their original calling. This descent was not a quiet fall, It was a rupture in the harmony of heaven and earth. The Watchers, in joining with human women, crossed a boundary that was never meant to be crossed. The result of their union was something the earth had never seen before and could not contain: the Nephilim. Giants in stature, yes, but even more so in power, influence, and corruption. Beings that were neither fully divine nor fully human, yet bore the worst of both worlds. Enoch describes them as towering over men, devouring not just food, but life itself. Their hunger grew beyond the natural. Animals, men, even each other, nothing was off limits. They turned creation into chaos and chaos into bloodshed. The Watchers did more than produce these beings. They brought forbidden knowledge. What began with lust quickly transformed into a systematic unraveling of the divine order. They taught humanity things it was never meant to know, at least not at that time. Azazel, one of their number, revealed the secrets of weaponry, crafting swords and knives, shaping war from metal and fire. Others introduced enchantments, signs, astrology, cosmetics, root cutting, and the ways of spirits. What was once a simple world guided by natural law became one overwhelmed by premature knowledge and corrupted wisdom. And yet, these events are barely whispered in the traditional canon. Genesis 6 gives only a brief line, saying that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they took wives, and that giants were born. But the depth of what truly happened is left untouched in those words. It is in Enoch's vision that the curtain is pulled back. He saw what others could not. He recorded what others would not dare. The sin of the Watchers was not just rebellion, it was the distortion of everything sacred. Their descent polluted the earth. Their knowledge, though powerful, tore holes in the spiritual fabric of humanity. And their offspring, these mighty Nephilim, filled the world with violence until the cries of the innocent reached the heavens themselves. It was a contamination so severe that even the skies trembled. In the records Enoch preserved, he was not merely an observer. He became a mediator, chosen by God to deliver a message to the Watchers. Their fate was sealed. For what they had done, there would be no return to their former glory. They had abandoned their place among the stars, and now they were to be cast into darkness, into a prison prepared not for men, but for those who once stood in the courts of heaven. Enoch's words carry a tone of divine judgment that burns through time. The Watchers, once beings of light, now awaited their doom in silence. Bound in chains beneath the hills and deserts, they exist in waiting, awaiting the day of reckoning when their full judgment will come. Their cries, though no longer heard by men, still echo in the places where shadows move and ancient wounds remain unhealed. And still, their memory endures. Not in the open pages of Sunday readings, but in ancient fragments, in apocryphal texts, in dreams that feel too vivid to dismiss. It is in these places that the story of the Watchers survives, buried but not forgotten. For Enoch saw them in their beauty, in their fall, and in their punishment. And in seeing them, he gave the world a testimony of how high beings can fall, and how their fall can ripple through generations. This is not merely a story of angels and rebellion. It is a warning, a reminder that power without obedience corrupts, that divine gifts used in defiance turn into weapons of destruction. The Watchers were not demons in the beginning, they were chosen. They were trusted, and they betrayed that trust. Their story did not vanish by accident. It was removed with intention. Perhaps because it revealed too much. Perhaps because it forced humanity to confront the uncomfortable truth that not all evil began on earth. These guardians, now exiled, left behind more than ruins. They left questions that continue to stir the hearts of those who dare to look deeper. Who else watched them fall? Who else made a choice? And what remains of their influence even now? The path Enoch walked leads straight into the heart of that mystery. His witness is a torch lit in the caverns of forgotten time. And if the world trembled under the weight of the Watchers' descent, it was not because of their strength alone, but because of what they chose to do with it. Among all the Watchers who descended and broke the divine order, One name rises above the rest, not because of rank or power alone, but because of the depth of his corruption and the reach of his influence. Azazel. In the silence that followed the fall, while others faded into the background of forgotten tales, Azazel remained, etched not only into the visions of Enoch, but whispered across generations, hidden beneath symbols and rituals, always nearby, never fully gone. In the Book of Enoch, his role is not simply that of a rebellious figure caught in a shared crime. He is described as the one who taught men to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates, things not born from the earth's natural rhythm, but forged in the fires of conflict. Before Azazel, men did not kill with precision. They did not carve out power through steel. But with his instruction, bloodshed became methodical. War gained structure. Violence became strategy. And that was only the beginning. Azazel went beyond the physical. He tampered with perception. He showed women how to paint their faces and adorn themselves in deceptive beauty. He unwrapped the concept of vanity and wove it into human identity. He did not simply teach them how to kill. He taught them how to perform, how to seduce, how to manipulate the gaze of others and mask intention beneath the surface. In his hands, mirrors became weapons, and desire became a tool of control. What he unleashed was not merely sin, but distortion. A warping of values so intimate and internal that it could no longer be seen for what it was. Enoch describes Azazel's influence as catastrophic, even more poisonous than that of his companions. His corruption was not limited to one domain, nor to one generation. It spilled across centuries, embedding itself in cultures, in rituals, in the things people began to value and protect. It was not just weapons and cosmetics. It was enchantments. It was seductions of the mind and spirit. He introduced sorcery, the invocation of invisible forces for selfish ends. He gave humanity not only forbidden knowledge, but the confidence to use it recklessly. His name is almost absent from the scriptures we hold today, though not entirely erased. In Leviticus 16, the Day of Atonement speaks of 2 goats, one offered to the Lord, and the other sent into the wilderness for Azazel. A strange and mysterious reference, preserved through tradition but never fully explained in the canon. Some translations have chosen to remove his name, replacing it with terms like scapegoat, draining the verse of its darker implications, but the ancient understanding was clearer. That goat did not simply wander, it was sent away, carrying sin to a being who had become a receptacle of corruption. Azazel was more than a symbol. He was an entity whose presence demanded exile, whose connection to sin was so direct that the people's transgressions were bound to his name. The wilderness was not chosen by accident. It was barren, hostile, removed from community, a mirror of Azazel's own separation from the divine realm. According to Enoch, he was cast into the desert, bound hand and foot, thrust into darkness with jagged stones as his prison. His punishment was meant to be eternal, a testimony to what happens when divine beings not only rebel, but infect the human soul with their rebellion. But even as he lay chained, the world above bore his fingerprints. Enoch's vision is unflinching. He saw what many would never dare imagine. He saw the children of men turn against one another with tools that gleamed in firelight, their hearts driven by pride, their faces masked with color and deception. He saw the earth defiled not by accidents of nature, but by intention. Azazel had introduced not just destruction, but elegance in sin. Violence, pride, sorcery, lust, these were no longer monsters to be feared, but temptations to be pursued. They wore beauty. They offered power. They whispered promises. In this, Azazel becomes more than a fallen watcher. He becomes a bridge between the divine rebellion above and the fractured reality below. His story is not an isolated tale. It is a key to understanding how the sacred became stained, how the light dimmed, not in an explosion of wrath, but in a slow and deliberate seduction. Even his punishment carries layers. The desert, often seen as a place of purification, becomes instead the grave of a divine traitor. The chains that bind him are not just physical, they are symbolic of divine justice, of a boundary that was crossed and can never be undone. And yet, the very need to chain him speaks volumes. Power restrained is still power acknowledged. One might ask why his story did not remain more central. Why the name of such an influential figure is reduced to an obscure footnote. The answer may lie not in historical accident, but in deliberate removal. His legacy was too disturbing, his influence too present. To acknowledge Azazel fully would mean confronting the uncomfortable truth that much of human advancement, at least in the eyes of the ancients, came from corrupted roots. That what we consider progress may have been born from disobedience. That the tools we use, the beauty we chase, the spells we cast in modern forms, may all echo a lesson humanity was never meant to learn. But Enoch remembered. He recorded what he saw, and in doing so, preserved a warning. Azazel is not simply a villain from a forgotten book. He is a symbol of what happens when knowledge is unmoored from obedience, when gifts are divorced from the giver, when divine power is wielded without reverence. His fall reveals a dimension of rebellion that is not loud but insidious. It creeps into desire, into perception, into what people cherish. If the Watchers as a whole represented a collective failure, Azazel represented the heart of it, the architect who gave sin its elegance, its tools, and its face. Bound though he may be, his influence lingers in the structures of war, in the illusion of beauty as power, in the allure of knowledge ungoverned by wisdom. Enoch did not write in abstractions. He saw real consequences. He saw cities rise and fall under the shadow of Azazel's teachings. He saw families broken, blood spilled, and spirits lost. And even as he wrote, the echo of that name continued to ripple through the world like a crack beneath the surface. So we ask not whether Azazel was real, but whether the world we know is still shaped by what he introduced. The darkness that entered through him did not leave with his binding. It remains, though, cloaked in modern form. And if Enoch's vision is true, then remembering Azazel is not just an act of curiosity. It is a call to discernment, to recognize that not all knowledge is innocent, not all beauty is divine, and not all power is worth the price it demands. When the sons of heaven crossed the sacred line and took for themselves the daughters of men, the union bore not merely scandal, but consequence. Beings who were never meant to exist, shaped by a collision of realms. From that unnatural covenant came the Nephilim, the giants whose presence shook the very foundations of the earth. These were not ordinary creatures, nor were they fully angelic or entirely human. They were hybrids, forged in defiance, raised in violence, and destined for judgment. In stature, they towered over men. In strength, they eclipsed nations. But their most dangerous quality lay not in muscle or height. It was in the unnatural awareness they carried, knowledge that came from their heavenly fathers, but twisted by earthly appetites. They were born into a world not prepared to contain them, and it wasn't long before they began to consume what surrounded them. Enoch writes of their hunger, vast, unrelenting, indifferent to boundaries. They fed on beasts, on crops, on men, and when the world could no longer satisfy their appetite, they turned against one another in bloodlust. Their cries rose not from repentance, but from rage. Their bodies grew, but their souls remained restless, bound to instincts that neither man nor angel could tame. Their fathers, the Watchers, looked upon what they had unleashed with horror, but the damage had already pierced deep. The Nephilim were not merely monsters. They were kings, warriors, rulers of ancient cities, worshipped by those too afraid to resist them. They claimed territories. They built legacies. They inspired fear that etched itself into the stories of cultures long buried. Their size made them myth. Their presence made them legend. But their truth was far darker than the tales that would later romanticize their might. The Book of Enoch gives us images few are prepared to see, visions of the Nephilim crying out from the earth, not as victims, but as condemned. Their voices echo through time, pleading not for mercy, but for justice they never understood. Born from rebellion, they inherited its curse. The world itself seemed to groan under their weight. Fields were stripped bare, rivers ran red. The balance that once kept creation in harmony fractured with every footstep they took. What Enoch witnessed was not simply destruction, it was desecration. And it required a response. That response came not from men, but from heaven. The earth, corrupted to its core, cried out. The blood of the innocent, shed by these mighty offspring, reached the throne of the Most High. And judgment came, not softly, not quietly, but with floodwaters that rose and roared, washing clean what had become unrecognizable. The Great Flood, as preserved in many traditions, was not just punishment for human wickedness. It was a divine intervention to erase the offspring that should never have walked among men. And yet, the memory of the Nephilim did not drown with their bodies. They survived not in form, but in story, in tablets, in walls etched with images of beings larger than nature allows, in myths of titans, demigods, champions of impossible strength. These echoes stretch from Sumer to Greece, from the Book of Enoch to the whispers in Canaan. They wear different names: Gilgamesh, Anakim, Rephaim, Og of Bashan, but the shape remains consistent. Creatures of old, born of heaven and earth, feared and revered. Scripture, when read carefully, still bears their trace. In Numbers 13, when the spies returned from Canaan, they describe the land's inhabitants as giants, the sons of Anak, and say, "We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." This was not metaphor, it was memory. A memory of a world still haunted by the remnants of what the Watchers brought forth. The biblical authors did not dwell long on them, but neither did they fully erase them. The references are brief, like shadows on the wall, easy to miss unless one already knows where to look. The deliberate silence that follows in later texts raises questions. Why omit them? Why strip away the full account of such beings? The answer may lie in the fear of what they represent. The Nephilim are reminders that heaven's rebellion left more than scars. It left seeds, seeds that grew into giants. Giants that nearly drowned the world in blood. Acknowledging them fully would force a reckoning, not just with ancient violence, but with the nature of spiritual transgression and its earthly consequences. Enoch preserved their cries, not as a call for sympathy, but as evidence. They cried because they were not made for eternity, yet they could not find peace in death. Their existence was a fracture in the order of things. They were born out of timing, out of alignment, out of blessing. And in their cries, Enoch heard the pain of beings that carried too much power without the wisdom to guide it. Their judgment was necessary. Their removal was merciful. Not for them, but for the world they ravaged. Still, humanity remembers. Deep in the psyche of ancient peoples, the image of beings greater than men, fierce and radiant, survives. In epics and temples, in runes and ruins, the Nephilim linger, veiled behind different names but always bearing the same warning. They remind us that not all greatness is holy, not all power is good, and not every legend should be chased. Enoch's witness stands as a bridge between two realities: the visible history of mankind and the unseen interventions of heaven. Through him, we glimpse a forgotten era, when heaven touched earth, not in peace, but in violation. The Nephilim were not merely the result of sin. They were sin embodied, stretching the limits of what the world could endure. And as long as their stories are told, through fragments, through silence, through myth, the question remains, what other echoes have yet to be uncovered? Long after the giants' bones were buried beneath the weight of judgment and their towering forms dissolved into the mud of history, something of them remained. Not flesh, nor form, nor even memory alone, but spirit, restless, lingering, neither ascended nor entirely perished. Enoch tells us that when the bodies of the Nephilim were destroyed in the Great Flood, their spirits did not follow the natural order of death. They were not welcomed into the realms of the righteous, nor granted passage into Sheol as the souls of men. Instead, They were left suspended in a kind of divine rejection, denied the inheritance of both worlds. In this strange exile, they became something else entirely. These disembodied spirits, born of heaven but marred by their earthly origins, became what Enoch names as evil spirits upon the earth. Rootless, angry, and ravenous, they wandered the dry places, seeking rest and finding none. Their existence was a consequence of their unnatural birth. They did not belong in heaven, for they were born in rebellion. They did not belong among mankind, for they were no longer of flesh. And so they roamed, like smoke without fire, shadows without bodies, cursed to haunt the very world their fathers had helped destroy. This transformation from giants of legend to tormentors of the spirit realm marks a pivotal point in the hidden theology of ancient texts. The Nephilim, once tyrants in flesh, became tyrants in spirit. Deprived of their monstrous bodies, their influence did not end, it merely changed form. What they once did through brute strength, they now sought through possession, deception, and torment. They became the unclean spirits, the whisperers in the dark, the presences that stirred fear in the night. And Enoch saw this not as metaphor, but as reality. The Book of Enoch records that these spirits would rise against men, afflict them, lead them astray, corrupt them, attack them, and stir them to violence. Though bodiless, they were not powerless. Their hatred, born from their disinheritance, turned into purpose, and their purpose was vengeance. Against the sons of men, against the created order, against the justice that had cast them into this wandering state. This concept is not limited to ancient writings. When we enter the pages of the New Testament, we encounter echoes of these spirits once more. They appear not in name, but in behavior. Jesus, during his ministry, encountered numerous beings described as unclean spirits. They spoke with knowledge beyond their station. They feared him. They pleaded not to be cast out into the abyss. In Luke 8, when Jesus confronts the man possessed by legion, the spirits beg him not to command them to go into the deep. The Greek term used, abyssos, is the very same word used in apocalyptic writings to describe the prison of fallen angels and the place where forbidden spirits are bound. This interaction is more than a simple exorcism. It is a confrontation with the ancient remnants of the Nephilim, spirits that had endured from before the flood, now reduced to seeking flesh in which to hide, voices through which to deceive, and lives through which to sow chaos once again. Their recognition of Jesus was immediate. They had seen him before, not in the flesh but in glory. And their terror was not rooted in confusion, but memory. The same authority that had once ordered their judgment now stood before them in human form, and they knew that their time of freedom was limited. The persistence of these spirits through millennia speaks to the depth of the cosmic rebellion chronicled in Enoch's writings. These were not new evils emerging in the time of Christ. They were ancient, older than nations, older than languages. Their presence was not spontaneous, but inherited, transmitted through spiritual decay, through doors opened by idolatry, witchcraft, and unchecked sin. They needed no temple, no altar, no name to operate, just invitation, just access. And yet, their identity remained hidden from the broader canon. The Bible names demons, but rarely explains their origin. It speaks of possession, but seldom tells from where these spirits come. It shows them driven out, but not how they entered. It reveals their defeat, but not their beginning. That beginning, as Enoch saw, was in the flood, not in the judgment of water, but in the consequence that followed. For though the giants died, their spirits were loosed, and the world has not been the same since. What makes their story more unsettling is how subtly it intertwines with the world we know. These spirits, lacking form, adapt. They mold themselves to cultures, languages, religions, fears. They do not always manifest with violent shrieks or foaming mouths. Often, they whisper, they plant thoughts. They stir divisions, they play with desires. Their work is not always theatrical. More often, it is personal, invasive, and disguised as ordinary. This is why their removal from the canon was perhaps not accidental. To admit their origin would be to acknowledge a spiritual infection that lingers from a pre-flood world. It would mean admitting that part of humanity's spiritual struggle is not only against temptation or internal weakness, but against the legacy of celestial defiance that once walked the earth in the flesh. The spirits of the Nephilim are reminders that sign leaves residue, that what began with a forbidden union did not end with a flood. Enoch's role in this unveiling is critical. He does not just witness their origin, he hears their cries, he watches their torment, he records their fate, and he makes it known that their final judgment has not yet come. They are allowed to wander for a season until the appointed time. This is what makes their story both ancient and urgent. They do not belong to a world long past. They move in the margins of the world that still is. Even today, some traditions carry faint memories of these beings. In apocryphal lore, in regional tales, in rituals designed to ward off unclean presences, there remains a sense that something old still stalks the edges of human experience, something persistent, something not quite dead. The spirits of the dead giants serve as a warning. That rebellion has consequences beyond generations. That sin can take on new forms when left unchecked, and that the wounds opened in the ancient days are still bleeding, just beneath the surface. What Enoch saw was not simply a vision of judgment. It was a vision of continuity, a link between the sins of the fathers and the torment of the children. And perhaps the most chilling truth is that these spirits, though denied a place in heaven, still seek dominion on earth. They cannot create, but they can corrupt. They cannot build, but they can infiltrate. They seek bodies, institutions, systems, anything they can twist into a vessel for their rebellion. Understanding who they were helps us understand who they still are, and understanding that prepares us to resist not only their influence, but the very roots of their origin. In the celestial order where harmony reigns and light moves with purpose, there stand four figures who do not merely exist among angels. They command, protect, execute, and intercede. Their presence, veiled in scripture yet unmistakable in ancient vision, stretches across time and carries weight that even prophets dared not describe in full. In the Book of Enoch, their names are not just whispered, they thunder through the heavens. Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel. These are not symbols, nor abstract expressions of divine intent. They are beings of unimaginable clarity, purpose, and fire. They are the keepers of divine boundaries, the ones who hold back the tides of chaos when all else seems poised to collapse. Enoch did not simply name them, he stood before them. And what he saw was not the sanitized imagery later found in art, where wings and robes wrap around gentle faces. What he recorded was something older, more urgent, and terrifying in its beauty. Each archangel bore a role so precise, so necessary, that the balance of creation seemed tied to their continual obedience. Michael, often referred to as the great prince and protector of Israel, is more than a military commander in the heavenly ranks. In Enoch's vision, he appears as a sentinel of mercy and warfare combined, a paradox of gentleness and unstoppable force. He is the one who pleads on behalf of humanity and yet also stands prepared to strike at the heart of rebellion. His sword does not simply destroy, it purifies. His presence in the heavenly court is not passive. It is decisive, marking the turning point between tolerance and judgment. The Book of Enoch reveals Michael as the one entrusted with the records of righteousness, the names of those who walk uprightly. And with those records, he determines the fate of kingdoms. Gabriel emerges not far behind him, but with a distinct charge. While Michael confronts darkness on the battlefield, Gabriel pierces through deception. In Enoch's account, Gabriel is sent to unleash justice upon the fallen watchers and their offspring. His task is surgical, precise, and terrifying. He is ordered to destroy the children born of transgression, to cleanse the earth from what should never have walked upon it. But his strength is not only in destruction. He is also the messenger, the revealer of divine secrets. From Enoch's vision to the Annunciation in the Gospel of Luke, Gabriel serves as the voice that bridges heaven and earth. When God speaks through angels, it is often Gabriel who carries the word, and that word is never casual. Raphael, though more hidden in the biblical canon, comes forward in the Book of Enoch with a role both healing and harrowing. His name means God has healed, but his tasks stretch beyond mercy. In Enoch's account, Raphael is the one who binds Azazel and casts him into the desert, sealing him beneath sharp stones until the day of judgment. This is no passive healer. This is a being who restores by removing corruption, who brings balance through severity. He is entrusted with the earth itself, with the care of creation's wounded order. Where mankind suffers under the weight of spiritual affliction, Raphael intervenes, not always gently, but always with purpose. His actions remind us that healing, at times, requires the removal of rot. And then there is Uriel, perhaps the most enigmatic of the four. His name means God is my light, and that light burns through confusion, through secret things, through mysteries long buried. Uriel is the archangel of wisdom and warning. He is sent to Enoch to explain the heavenly signs, the movement of the stars, the laws of the sun and moon, the calendar of creation itself. But his duties do not end in instruction. In Enoch's vision, Uriel is the one who stands at the gate of judgment, illuminating the path not only for the righteous, but for the condemned. He exposes lies. He reveals what is hidden. And with that revelation comes reckoning. Each of these four carries more than a name. They bear identities forged in divine intention, sculpted in authority, and expressed in actions that shaped both heaven and earth. Their stories were known to Enoch not because he read them, but because he walked among them. He was taken into their presence, not to glorify them, but to understand the framework of divine order. And that framework was not arbitrary. It was deliberate, ancient, and unshakable. So why are their full accounts absent from the canonical scriptures we possess today? Perhaps it is because the complexity of their roles, the weight of their actions, demanded a level of spiritual maturity that few were ready to receive. Or perhaps it was because their presence threatened to dismantle simplified views of the spiritual world. These archangels do not fit neatly into categories. They are not merely protectors, nor only judges. They are agents of divine will, moving in multiple dimensions, engaging in wars we cannot see, and executing decrees we have only glimpsed. The early church debated their place. Some held their names sacred. Others feared the rise of angel worship and chose silence instead. But silence does not mean absence. Their fingerprints remain. In Daniel, in Luke, in Tobit, in Revelation, they move behind the veil, stepping into view only when the moment demands it. And when they do not come to entertain. They come to deliver, to declare, to divide light from shadow. Enoch's witness to something remarkable. It does not exalt these beings as objects of devotion. Rather, it frames them as servants whose glory reflects the one who sent them. But it also forces the reader to confront a world more active than we often imagine. A world where judgment has agents, where healing has a name, and where divine messages are carried not by dreams alone, but by living flame. Each archangel holds a secret, a weapon, a warning. Michael carries the scroll of remembrance, and his blade marks the line between covenant and chaos. Gabriel speaks the unspeakable and silences the proud. Raphael restores through confrontation and binds what dares to infect the sacred. Uriel burns through ignorance and reveals what humanity was never meant to hide behind. These are not distant figures. They are active, still moving. Whether seen or unseen, their roles have not ended. They wait for appointed moments, for the orders that come not from man but from the throne. And when that moment arrives, they do not hesitate. To read Enoch is to realize that heaven is not still, that divine justice has instruments, that mercy is not a whisper, but a choice made with fire. And the four who stand at the center of that unfolding are not just angels, they are God's hidden champions, guarding mysteries that shape the world, bearing names that resonate through eternity. In the earliest whispers of celestial rebellion, long before the name Satan became etched into the collective fears of generations, there stood a figure cloaked in even deeper mystery, a being once radiant with authority, older than any kingdom of man, whose fall marked a fracture not only in the order of heaven, but in the fabric of cosmic trust itself. His name, obscured by time and translated out of most texts, was Satanael. This name, rare and unsettling in its form, carries a weight that defies simplification. In the Book of Enoch and scattered apocryphal traditions, Satanael emerges not merely as an adversary, but as a former prince of heaven, an entity whose title once held the imprint of El, the divine name, suggesting that he was not created as a corrupter, but as a bearer of light, wisdom, and responsibility. The echo of his name tells a story hidden behind the veil of language. Satanael, the accuser with divine authority, later reduced in many texts simply to Satan, a stripping of identity that mirrors his descent. According to the deeper layers of Enochian tradition, Satanael was not cast down because of a momentary act of defiance, but because of a progressive and deliberate rebellion rooted in pride. He did not rise against God in ignorance. He rose in full awareness of what he was abandoning. It was not power he lacked, but humility. It was not knowledge he craved, but worship meant for another. He turned his eyes toward the throne not to guard it, but to ascend it. In this early portrayal, Satanael is not yet the horned caricature of later folklore. He is a being of majesty, clothed in the light he once reflected, walking among the stones of fire as described in visions attributed to Ezekiel. His rebellion did not begin with grotesque violence, but with subtle accusation, questioning the justice of God, the worthiness of man, and the order of creation itself. He did not wield a sword, he wielded doubt. This is the same figure Enoch glimpsed, not merely a tempter, but an accuser standing before the heavenly court, not yet banished, still permitted to speak. In the older traditions, Satanael retains a form of access to the divine council. He observes, he questions. He brings charges against humanity. His role is not yet confined to the shadows. He stands in the court, pointing, naming faults, attempting to unravel the covenant by holding up the weakness of those bound by it. This vision finds eerie harmony in the Book of Job, where the adversary is seen not as a serpent or beast, but as one who walks among the sons of God and presents himself before the Lord. He challenges Job's righteousness, not through violence, but through suspicion. His power is not in force, but in accusation. He asks questions that poison trust. He crafts scenarios that test loyalty. The image here is not of a chaotic demon, but of a legal adversary, methodical and permitted, bound to a role that still retains some measure of heavenly legitimacy. But the story of Satanael, as Enoch perceived it, does not remain in that court forever. His fall was not instant, but it was inevitable. The glory he once wore begins to decay under the weight of his own ambition. The light he bore turns inward, becomes shadow. And eventually, the El is lost from his name, no longer Satanael, but Satan, a being still speaking, but no longer shining. Still active, but now hunted by the judgment he once thought himself beyond. The question then arises, why was his fuller identity concealed, buried beneath layers of doctrine and redaction? Why do the canonical scriptures sidestep his origin story, offering only fragments and veiled references? The answer, perhaps, lies not only in theological caution, but in fear of confronting the reality that evil did not always wear ugliness, that its beginning was wrapped in beauty, that betrayal was born in the midst of brilliance. To acknowledge Satanael fully would be to admit that the first corruption did not come from chaos, but from the misuse of order. That the first lie was not shouted in rage, but whispered through reason. It would challenge the comfortable distance between divine light and demonic rebellion, forcing us to see that even the highest places are not immune to fracture when pride is left unchecked. Enoch, walking among the stars and hearing the counsel of the holy, was granted a perspective too raw for many to receive. He saw the throne and those who gathered before it. He saw not only the worshippers, but the accusers. He discerned the difference between authority and usurpation, between obedience and ambition. In his writings, Satan becomes the embodiment of what happens when the highest gifts are turned against their giver. And still, his presence did not vanish. Though cast down, his voice lingered. In temptations, in systems of injustice, in subtle manipulations of truth, Satan's echo remains, not always named, rarely recognized, but always near the fault lines of human failure. The tempter in the wilderness, the accuser before the throne, the whisper behind the power-hungry king. He adapts, not because he changes, but because he understands the human heart. Enoch's revelation is not designed to create fear, but awareness. To know that the enemy was not always monstrous, that the deepest deceptions come not from what is foreign, but from what was once familiar. The danger of Satan is not his strength, it is his memory, the memory of glory twisted, the memory of truth used as weapon, the memory of trust broken from within. And so, his name was obscured, his history fragmented, his identity rebranded. Not forgotten entirely, but repackaged into a form easier to manage, easier to rebuke, and perhaps easier to misunderstand. The church fathers may have buried his fuller story not to deceive, but to protect, to shield the faithful from a complexity that, if misunderstood, could breed heresy or confusion. But Enoch saw what history tried to veil. He saw the brilliance before the fall, the pride that poisoned eternity, the exile that followed. And in doing so, he left behind not just a tale of rebellion, but a mirror. For the story of Satan is not merely about a being who once stood in heaven. It is about what happens when creation turns against its creator with reason instead of rage, with calculation instead of chaos. The accuser remains, not victorious, but active, not forgotten, but renamed. And even now, the throne still hears his voice, though the time allotted to him grows shorter with every breath. Deep beneath the surface of the visible world, past the noise of cities and the rhythm of nations, there exists a place few dare to imagine, a realm where justice is sealed in darkness and where power is not measured by voice or crown, but by restraint. It is here, in the forgotten places of the unseen, that the final figure in Enoch's vision stands guard. He is known by many names across ancient texts: Abaddon, Apollyon, the angel of the abyss. Yet Enoch saw him not only in title, but in terrifying function. This being is not a fallen angel in the sense of the Watchers, nor is he a demon in pursuit of chaos for pleasure. His purpose is older, colder, and anchored in judgment. He is the warden of the abyss, the keeper of prison realms that hold powers too dangerous for release. According to Enoch, this angel does not rebel, he restrains. He does not tempt, he confines. His role is not to corrupt, but to hold back corruption until the appointed time. In Revelation 9, we catch a glimpse of him when the fifth trumpet sounds. A star falls from heaven, and to him is given the key to the bottomless pit. Smoke rises, and from the smoke, locust-like beings pour forth, creatures of torment, not death. Their king, the one who rules over them, is named Abaddon in Hebrew and Apollyon in Greek, both meaning destroyer. But his destruction is not mindless. It is part of the divine clockwork set in motion long ago. He releases what he is commanded to release. He does not act on his own. And yet, his presence shakes even the firmest hearts. What Enoch witnessed of this angel was not flamboyant terror, but dread rooted in holiness. The angel of the abyss does not rage, he enforces. He holds the key to places where fallen stars are chained, where spirits who defied the natural order now groan in darkness. These are not myths designed to frighten the weak. They are structures of spiritual law that undergird the visible world. Enoch did not describe this being with elaborate imagery. Because the weight of his presence cannot be captured in metaphor. He is the reminder that divine justice is not only about grace, but also about containment. Why such a figure was veiled in the pages of Scripture is not difficult to understand. His appearance threatens the way many interpret the boundaries of heaven and hell, good and evil. He blurs the line between warrior and warden, between angel and executioner. His task is not to inspire worship or fear, but to bear witness to the cost of rebellion. And in this way, he ties together the entire vision Enoch beheld. The angel of the abyss marks the limits of divine patience. When the watchers fell, when Azazel corrupted, when the Nephilim raged, when their spirits wandered, when Satan accused and twisted, this final being was already waiting. His authority is not derived from conquest, but from divine delegation. He locks the doors others tried to break open. He stands where no one else dares to stand, in the place where mercy ends and reckoning begins. In Enoch's visions, the abyss is not metaphor, it is a reality. And the one who watches over it is no less real than the archangels who carry light and healing. His existence challenges the notion that all divine agents must be gentle, that all heavenly work must be visible. The angel of the abyss works in silence, in shadows, in places where no mortal would survive. And yet, his story, like the others, was buried. Perhaps because to understand him fully would require acknowledging the full extent of the rebellion that infected heaven and earth. Perhaps because his very presence suggests that some forces are still being held back, not by chance, but by decree. And that someday, when the appointed time comes, those chains will be loosened. Not because he has failed, but because the final chapter demands their release. This being is not the end of the story, but he is the door through which judgment begins. And so we come to the end of Enoch's vision, not the end of mystery, but the completion of a cycle. 7 beings, once erased or obscured, now brought into light, not for entertainment, but for awakening. Their stories are not fantasy. They are fragments of a greater truth too powerful to be forgotten. You have seen what Enoch saw. You have walked beside the watchers, felt the shadow of the Nephilim, heard the cries of their wandering spirits, stood in the presence of the archangels, glimpsed the face of the ancient accuser, and now descended to the gate of the abyss where the destroyer waits. The question that remains is not whether these beings were real, but whether their influence still echoes in our world. And if it does, what does that mean for us? To discover these truths is to begin to see Scripture not as a closed book, but as a living narrative, full of doors yet unopened, voices yet heard, and battles still unfolding. If this journey has opened your eyes or stirred something deeper within you, consider subscribing to this channel to continue exploring the mysteries that were hidden, the wisdom that was buried, and the light that still breaks through even the deepest shadows. Like this video if it challenged or inspired you. Share it with those close to you, friends, family, anyone who has ever wondered what lies beyond the familiar words of the Bible, and leave a comment below. Your insights, questions, and reflections are welcome here, as we continue to seek what was forgotten and listen for the echoes of the unseen.